New Mexico Territory. 1879, the wind carried grit and judgment in equal parts when Delaney Brooks stepped off the stagecoach in the dry-boned town of Harlow's Junction. Her boots hit the ground with the weight of someone who had already lost too much and had no intention of losing more. The sun burned high above, making the wood sign that hung from the general store swing like a warning. Folks watched her. Some squinted. Others turned away. That was nothing new. Delaney had been watched her whole life for wanting too much, for dreaming too loud, for not knowing when to stop hoping. She clutched the small hands beside her children, Ava and Amos. Both under 10, both thin from the long journey and the lean years before it. Their father had walked out 2 years ago, left nothing but a letter and a pile of debts in Kansas. Delaney had sold what little she had left, packed 2 bags and headed west. She was looking for land, work, a chance, something that did not vanish when a man got tired of trying. But the stairs here told her what she already knew: women like her weren't supposed to want more than a roof and silence, and certainly not with 2 children and no husband. "Ma," Ava whispered, "where are we gonna sleep?" Delaney didn't answer at first. She looked around. The saloon was loud with midday hollering. The livery stank of sun-baked manure. A church bell rang from somewhere beyond the ridge. They had nowhere yet, but she wouldn't say that out loud. "We'll find a place," she said, brushing dust from Amos's cheek with her thumb. "I promise." She was about to head toward the boarding house when a voice behind her called out. "You lost, ma'am." She turned. A tall man in a wide-brimmed hat leaned against a chestnut horse, reins looped loose in his hand. His shirt was rolled at the sleeves, revealing sun-browned forearms. His eyes were clear, steady, the kind of gaze that did not flinch when faced with wreckage. "No," she said, straightening. "Just arrived." He glanced at the children, then back at her. "Harlow's Junction ain't much for strangers. Especially not ones with little ones." "I figured that out already," she said, sharper than she meant. To her surprise, he smiled, not mocking, just calm. "Name's Ridge Emerson. I've got a spread out past the mesa. 20 acres cabin, clean well, not fancy but solid." She blinked, wary. "You offering me land or directions?" He tilted his head. "Offering you supper, and a place to rest tonight. You and your young ones look like you've had a time." Delaney's hands tightened on the children's shoulders. "Why?" "Because I was raised by a woman who didn't have near enough help when Pa died. Because I got more food than I can eat and beds that stay empty. And because it's the right thing." She studied him. There was nothing slick about him, nothing rehearsed. Just a man standing still in a world that often did not. "I do not take charity." "Then call it a neighbor lending a hand." Ava looked up at her with wide eyes. Amos kicked at the dirt. Delaney let out a breath. "One night." Ridge nodded once. "That's fair." His horse pulled the wagon they borrowed from the livery. The ride out to Ridge's homestead was quiet except for the creak of wood and the dry wind brushing the grass. The children dozed against her sides. Delaney kept her eyes on the land. The cabin sat near a slope of red rock, tucked into cottonwoods that whispered when the wind passed. Fence posts cut a clean line around a garden and a corral where 2 horses stood idle. There was no woman's touch in the place, no curtains, no flowers, but it was clean, steady. Like Ridge. He helped her down without a word, then scooped Ava into his arms when the girl wobbled, too tired to walk. Delaney started to protest, but Ava had already curled into his shoulder like she belonged there. Inside, he lit a lamp and stirred the embers in the hearth. "Supper won't be fancy. Beans, biscuits, and salt pork." "That's more than we had last night," she said before she could stop herself. He just nodded and started cooking. Later, after the children were tucked into the loft bed and breathing deep, Delaney stepped out onto the porch. Ridge stood there, leaning against the post, arms crossed, watching the stars. "You always feed strangers?" she asked, settling beside him. He shrugged. "Just the ones who look like they need someone to believe in them." She looked at him. "And what makes you think I do? You got that look in your eyes, like you've been carrying weight alone too long." Delaney stared out at the horizon. "People say I want too much, that I should settle, be quiet, be grateful for whatever scraps life throws." "What do you want?" She hesitated. "A home. Real one, not just a roof, but a place where I am not always waiting for the next thing to break." Ridge's voice was low. "That is not too much." She turned to him. "It is to most men." He met her gaze. "Then they are fools." Silence stretched between them, but it was not heavy. It was full of something warm and rising. She hadn't felt it in years. "I will not be someone's burden," she said, "and I will not let my children be anyone's pity." He stepped closer, slow and sure. "Then do not be someone's choice." Her breath caught. It was just words, but not just words. He did not try to touch her, did not press anything, just stood there, steady as the land he lived on. Delaney nodded once, slow. "We will leave tomorrow." "You can," he said, "or you can stay, until you find what you came looking for." She looked at him, really looked. Ridge Emerson did not offer half measures. And something in her, something long buried, dared to believe that maybe, just maybe, wanting more was not a sin. Inside, the children stirred in sleep. Outside, the stars burned steady. And for the first time in years, Delaney Brooks felt herself breathe. By first light, Delaney was already outside, sleeves rolled and hair braided tight against the morning breeze. Ridge's yard held a quiet rhythm, noisy only with birdsong and the creak of saddle leather as he led one of his geldings from the corral. She was stacking kindling against the cabin wall when he spoke. "You always work before breakfast." "I never liked waiting on someone else's fire," she said, brushing bark dust from her hands. He nodded once, then hitched the reins and walked the horse toward the trough. "You don't owe me labor. I don't believe in taking without giving." Her voice was calm, but her eyes tracked the movement of the horse, the way Ridge's hand moved slow and sure behind its ears. "Besides, I'd rather be useful than grateful." "That's a rare kind of truth," he said, glancing at her, "but it sits honest on you." Inside, Ava's laughter rang out, high and clear. Delaney's mouth softened, though she didn't smile. "They sleep better in quiet places." Ridge leaned against the hitching post. "You plan to keep going west?" She hesitated. "I plan to stop wherever felt steady." "You think this place might be?" "I think I need to see it through more than one good night before I decide." He rubbed the back of his neck. "Fair enough." She crossed the yard, boots crunching over gravel, and paused beside him. "You got work this morning?" "Fence line needs checking. Something spooked the horses last night, found one gate swung open at dawn." "I can ride," she said, lifting her chin. "You just got here. And I still know how to handle wire and hammer. Unless you think I can't manage a saddle." He studied her not with doubt, but with the kind of attention that weighed experience against pride. "You ride with me. Amos and Ava stay here, safe, warm, fed. I won't leave them alone. You wouldn't have to." He turned toward the cabin. "Old Miss Tilda lives just down the wash. Midwife, widow, and the sort of woman who can scare off a coyote with a broom handle. She sits with my stock when I'm stuck in town." She'd take to the children. Delaney glanced toward the door, where Amos stood blinking against the light, hair askew, arms folded like he was already defending against the day. "You trust her?" "I wouldn't offer if I didn't." She nodded once. "Then I will too." They rode out after breakfast, the sun climbing behind them, soft gold on the ridges. Ridge didn't talk much, which suited her. She didn't want chatter, just the creak of saddle leather and the crisp snap of mesquite under hoof. They reached the far fence by mid-morning. Ridge dismounted. tested a post, then gestured toward a sagging section. Wires loose again. Must have been that storm last week. Delaney tied her horse and moved to his side, already unwinding the spool from his saddlebag. You always work alone, most times. Why? He twisted a kink from the wire. Folks in town talk too quick. Out here the land talks slower. She pressed the wire into place, holding it while he hammered the staple. And you listen better out here. That and nobody out here's trying to be someone they ain't. She looked at him, the side of his face shaded beneath the brim. You think that's what I'm doing? No, he said without pause. I think you're someone who's been told too many times she asks too much, and I think you're still brave enough to ask anyway. Her hands stilled on the wire. I thought I stopped being brave a long time ago. He met her eyes then, the distance between them narrowing not with steps but with understanding. You didn't. They worked in silence after that, but it wasn't empty. It was full of the sound of effort, shared the ring of the hammer, the stretch of wire, the soft breath each of them let out when the line finally held. By the time they turned back toward the cabin, the sun had shifted westward. The land wore a deeper color now, and Delaney noticed how the shadows fell long across Ridge's shoulders, how the quiet in him wasn't empty but earned. As they crested the narrow rise above the homestead, she saw the children running circles through the grass. Miss Tilda perched on a chair beneath the cottonwood, mending something with needle and thread. Ava spotted them first and waved both arms, her braid flying. Amos didn't wave, he just stood still and waited. Delaney's chest tightened in a way that had nothing to do with weariness. Ridge dismounted and handed her the reins without speaking. As she took them, his fingers brushed hers not by chance, not by accident. Deliberate, steady. Delaney didn't draw back. That night, after the children were asleep and the fire had burned low, she sat at the table with a tin cup of coffee and watched Ridge sharpen his knife by lamplight. She hadn't asked him to stay. He hadn't offered to go. The silence between them held something new, something neither of them tried to name. You ever think about leaving? She asked. He paused, knife resting against the whetstone. I used to. After Pa passed, I thought maybe I'd go find something different. But every time I tried, I kept thinking about this land, about starting something that wouldn't leave. She turned the cup in her hands. I want that too, but I don't know what it looks like. Not really. He set the knife down and met her gaze. Maybe it looks like this, not all at once, just piece by piece. Her throat worked around something she didn't say. Instead, she nodded once, slow, outside, the wind shifted, carrying a scent of rain from the western hills. Inside, neither of them moved to end the night. The first rain came just after dusk 3 days later, soft and even, like the land had been holding its breath too long. Ridge stood on the porch with a lantern in one hand, watching the drops gather in the eaves, not saying anything when Delaney stepped beside him. She held a folded shirt she'd mended for him, threaded with her careful stitches, the kind that didn't call attention to themselves. You mind if I hang this inside? She asked, nodding toward the flames behind the window. He took the shirt and ran his thumb along the seam without looking at her. Didn't ask you to fix it. I know, she said. Did it anyway. Ridge turned, opened the door, and held it for her. You're good at doing what you think needs doing. Delaney didn't answer until they were both inside, the scent of wet dust still clinging to them. She set the kettle on the stove, stoked the heat gently. I spent too many years waiting for someone else to notice what needed doing. Then I stopped waiting. Ridge leaned his back against the wall, arms crossed. You always plan to stay moving. I plan to survive, she said. Plans don't stretch much further than that when your husband walks out and your neighbors pretend they never knew you. He didn't flinch at the word husband, didn't fill the air with pity or approval. Just watched the steam rise from the kettle. What about now? Delaney poured water into 2 tin cups, set one in front of him, and sat. Now I'm watching how the world works when it's not trying to break me. Ridge took a sip, then looked at her over the rim. You think I'm different from the last man who made you promises. You haven't made any. He nodded once. That's true. She reached across the table, not touching him, only resting her hand near his. Maybe that's why I'm still here. That night, Delaney laid awake on the cot Ridge had set up for her in the corner, listening to the rain's hush and the occasional turn of Ridge's boots above in the loft. Not restless, just present. She kept her hands folded over her stomach and let her thoughts drift to the idea of a winter here. Firewood stacked deep, canned peaches from the trees behind the garden, Ava running with a wool scarf trailing, Amos asking Ridge how to shape a fence post. She blinked hard and turned her face to the wall. In the morning, the rain had passed, leaving the air clean and cold. The sky was pale and wide, rimmed with low clouds. Delaney found Ridge in the barn, brushing down the mare while the goats rustled in their pen. I've been thinking, she said. He didn't turn. That usually means something's about to change. I want to stay through winter. She stepped into the barn, her boots leaving soft prints in the damp earth. Not just for the children, for me. Ridge set the brush down. You planning to work the land come spring, if you're offering? I am. She leaned against the stall, folding her arms. Then I will. He met her eyes. You'd have to move into the cabin proper. No sense in you sleeping out in the corner when there's room upstairs. Delaney raised her brows, but her voice stayed even. That an invitation? It's a truth, Ridge said. You deserve better than a borrowed cot. She studied him a long moment, then nodded. All right. The next week settled into something close to rhythm. Ridge taught Amos how to oil the hinges on the barn door and showed Ava how to split kindling without splinters. Delaney spent mornings in the garden, digging the last of the carrots, and afternoons patching the roof, leak with Ridge, while the children built forts from scrap wood and old feed sacks. One evening, while they sat on the porch with their boots propped on the rail, Ridge offered her the deed ledger, a leather-bound book with his father's name still inked on the inside cover. You ever think about putting your name down next to mine? Delaney looked at the page, then at him. You offering that now? I'm offering you a choice. I'm not asking for an answer today. She closed the book gently. I was never asked before, just expected or warned off. I ain't either of those, I know. The wind stirred through the cottonwoods, carrying the scent of sage. Ava's laughter rang faint from the yard. Delaney turned toward Ridge, her voice quieter than before. I won't marry because it's convenient, or because it makes other people feel easier around me. If I do it, it'll be because I want the man, not the name. His voice came steady. Then if you ever want me, that's enough. She didn't answer right away, but she didn't turn away either. That night, as she tucked the children into the loft's far bed and turned to descend the ladder, Ridge caught her wrist gently at the top. Stay a while, he said. She did. They sat on the edge of his bed, not touching, but close enough to feel the warmth between them. Ridge reached into the little cedar box on the shelf and pulled out a folded square of cloth. This was my ma's, he said, handing it to her. She carried it the day she married my pa. Said she'd pass it to someone who knew what it meant to fight for the life they wanted. Delaney unfolded the cloth slowly. It was a handkerchief, finely stitched, the initials barely worn. I didn't expect this, she said. I know. She folded it again carefully. I'm not ready to say yes. I'm not asking for it yet. Her eyes lifted to his. But you're hoping. I'm holding space, he said, for whatever you decide. Delaney stood, her fingers curling around the cloth. Then I'll stay a little longer. Ridge didn't smile, just nodded, quiet and sure. Outside, the stars pressed close, watching. Inside, two hearts waited without fear. The first frost came in early November, softening the ground beneath a thin crust of white by dawn. Delaney stood outside the cabin with her arms folded, watching Amos and Ava gather the last of the windfallen pecans from under the trees. Ridge had gone into town before sunup, taking the wagon to fetch flour and salt, leaving behind a list for her in his tidy, slanted hand. She hadn't asked, but she read it twice anyway. She stepped down into the root cellar, lantern in hand, and checked the shelves she'd been stocking for weeks. Beans sealed tight in glass jars, strips of cured meat wrapped in muslin, winter squash resting in straw. She counted without speaking, then climbed back up and latched the door behind her. Later, she found Miss Tilda sitting in the garden, a basket of dried herbs on her lap. The older woman didn't startle when Delaney approached. She just looked up, face weathered but keen. "You know how to make a pain poultice?" Tilda asked without greeting. "I've made one," Delaney said, brushing her hands down her apron. "Not since Kansas." Tilda plucked a handful of leaves from the basket and handed them over. "Goldenrod. Mash it with lard, wrap it warm. You'll want it when the cold settles into your joints." Delaney took it, her brow furrowed. "You think I'll be here come snow?" Tilda looked at her then, long and slow. "That man doesn't look at you like someone passing through." Delaney's voice was careful. "I've stayed before. It never stuck. Maybe you didn't have land beneath your feet that wanted you to grow." Delaney didn't answer. She turned the leaves in her palm, their scent sharp and clean. That evening, Ridge returned with the wagon bed full, his shoulders dusted with road grit. Ava ran to him first, Amos slower behind, dragging a half-carved stick in one hand. Ridge ruffled each head without fuss and handed Delaney a parcel wrapped in brown paper. "Not on the list," he said, "but I saw it in the shop and thought maybe." She opened it on the porch before the lamp was lit. Inside was a roll of blue calico, the kind she'd seen once in a window and never touched. She didn't speak right away. "Figured you might want to make something for yourself," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. She stared at the fabric, fingers still curled beneath the edge. "What made you think I'd use it?" "I didn't. I just knew you hadn't had the chance." That night, she laid the cloth out across the table after the children were asleep. Ridge sat nearby, mending a strap on one of the bridles. The fire snapped low behind them. "I used to think wanting anything fine made me selfish," she said, smoothing the fabric. "Even as a girl, if I lingered too long near something pretty, Mama would say, 'Don't get ideas above your station.'" Ridge didn't look up. Maybe her station didn't see far enough. "I didn't want riches. Just a life that didn't feel like holding my breath." "You breathing now?" She looked at him. The needle paused in his hand, the rawhide strap looped over his knee. "I think I am." He set the bridle aside, hands resting on his thighs. "Then I hope you keep doing it here." Delaney folded the calico, set it aside. "I'll need fabric for the children too if we're staying through winter. You'll have it, not just from you." "No," he said. "Not just from me." Outside, wind drifted through the trees, the leaves brittle and thin. Inside, the small space between them closed, not with movement but with certainty. The next morning, Ridge called Amos out to the barn and taught him how to check hooves for stone bruises, his voice low and patient. Ava helped Delaney knead bread dough, her small hands pressing beside hers, flour dusting their arms. "You ever sew a dress?" Delaney asked her daughter after supper. "I helped Miss Tilda make curtains," Ava said, eyes bright. "Can I try?" Delaney reached for the folded calico. "I think we'll start with a pattern." 3 nights later, after the bread cooled and the tools were hung, Ridge walked with her to the edge of the pasture where the sky stretched wide and the stars blinked faint behind a veil of coming snow. He held out a folded paper. "Filed this in town," he said. Deeds in both our names now, figured it was time. She stared down at it, then back up at him. You didn't wait for me to agree. I didn't need to, he said. You've been doing the work same as me. This place is already half yours. Delaney's breath caught, the cold air sharp in her chest. Ridge, I'm not asking anything in return, he said. Just wanted you to know no matter what else you decide, this land sees you as its own. She folded the paper slowly, tucked it into her coat. Then I guess I'll have to plant more come spring. He nodded once. We will. They stood like that for a long while, the wind tugging at their coats, the dark laid out around them like a promise. When they turned back toward the cabin, they walked shoulder to shoulder, no space between. The first snow came quiet, just before dawn, blanketing the yard in pale hush. Delaney stood barefoot at the cabin window, hands wrapped around a steaming cup, watching the flakes drift against the fence rails. Ava's soft breathing came from the loft above. Amos had rolled onto his side in sleep beside her, his hand curled around the edge of the quilt she'd made from scraps Ridge had collected in town. Ridge stirred behind her, then slid his coat over her shoulders without a word. She hadn't heard him rise. She leaned back just slightly into the warmth of him, her breath leaving a ghost against the glass. I thought winter might feel heavier, she said, but it doesn't. He rested one hand on the windowsill beside hers. It won't. Not when it's shared. They dressed slowly that morning, careful not to wake the children, and stepped out into the white stillness. Ridge carried a basket looped over his arm. They walked the fence line together, checking that the boards had held against the wind. The snow reached only to their ankles, and the sky above was still and gray. Next week we'll need to haul wood from the far grove, he said, and set traps while the mink are still moving. Delaney nodded. I can take the traps east of the ridge. I saw fresh prints near the stream bed yesterday. He glanced sideways. You thinking of staying past spring? She met his gaze. I already did. They didn't speak again until they reached the old cottonwood at the edge of the property. Ridge knelt and brushed snow from the base of the trunk, revealing a small wooden box he'd tucked there beneath a stone shelf. He opened it and handed her a folded cloth. Delaney unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a silver band, worn but polished, the inside engraved with initials too faded to read. It was my mother's, he said. Pa gave it to her before they built the first cabin. She wore it planting the first apple tree. He told me once it wasn't worth much, but it was the weight of a promise. Delaney turned it in her hand, silent. The air between them was cold on her cheeks, but her chest felt warm, steady. I don't want ceremony, she said. Not dresses or guests or scripture I don't believe in. I don't need those things, Ridge said. I only need you to say yes. She looked up at him, eyes clear. Yes. He took her hand and slid the ring onto her finger. It fit loosely, but it held. She closed her hand around his and didn't let go. They walked back with the basket full of kindling and a silence between them that didn't need to be filled. That night, Delaney told Ava and Amos at the table. Ava squealed and hugged her waist, her braid falling across Delaney's apron. Amos nodded once, serious, then turned to Ridge. You gonna teach me to lay stone come spring? Ridge ruffled his hair. Course I am. We'll build a root cellar deeper than the last. Will I get my own room? Ava asked. Delaney smiled down at her. You'll have space enough to grow. That winter passed without hardship. There were colds, yes, and days where the wind howled so loud they couldn't hear themselves speak. But there was food in the cellar, firewood stacked high, and laughter that rose from the hearth most nights. Ridge carved a cradle for Miss Tilda's niece's baby, and Delaney helped sew the bedding. When the snow pressed hardest, they all stayed close, playing old card games and telling stories by lamplight. In early March, Ridge and Delaney stood by the creek as it thawed. the ice cracking and shifting beneath the sun. He reached into his coat and handed her a folded paper. "Filed proper," he said. "You'll find your name on the land claim now, not just scrawled beside mine." She opened it slowly, her fingers trembling only slightly. Her name was there, inked in strong lines. "I never thought I'd be someone who belonged to something," she said. "But I do. To this land," Ridge said, "and to me." She reached up and touched his face, her fingers warm despite the wind. "And you to me." They kissed then, not rushed, not uncertain. It was a kiss made of roots and sky, of meals shared without question and silences that never needed to be broken. It was the kind that settled, not burned. Spring came late, but it came. They planted together corn, beans, and squash along the southern slope, Delaney showing Ava how to space the seeds in her palm. Ridge and Amos rebuilt the chicken coop, stronger this time, with a latch Amos had carved himself. They repaired the barn roof by hand, and when the first calf was born, Delaney wrapped it in burlap and held it steady while Ridge tied off the cord. The wedding happened one Sunday morning, quiet as she'd asked. Just Ridge, Delaney, the children, and Miss Tilda, who stood beneath the cottonwood with her hands folded and her eyes sharp. Delaney wore a dress she'd stitched from the blue calico. Her hair was braided back, a ribbon tied at the end. Ridge wore his father's shirt, mended and clean. They spoke no vows, none were needed. Their eyes said enough. Afterward, they sat under the trees and shared a pie Ava had baked with Tilda's help. Amos passed around cups of cider, his chest puffed with pride. That night, Ridge carried Delaney over the threshold, more out of laughter than tradition, and she kissed his jaw before they stepped inside. Years later, when folks asked how the Emersons came to be the heart of that stretch of land, no one could quite say. They just knew the garden grew strong, the fences held, and the cabin lights never burned out too early. Children came and grew, and neighbors never went hungry. Delaney kept the silver ring on her finger, even when her hands were blistered from field work. Ridge kept the calico ribbon tucked in his drawer, beside the deed and the first sketch Ava ever made of the homestead. And every winter, when the snow began to fall and the world turned quiet again, they stood at the window together, not waiting, just watching. Together. Always.